So, Joe, I know you've done a lot of thinking about women in the Bible, and one of the critiques that especially non-Christians will have is that the Bible is misogynistic. How do you respond to that challenge?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one I actually get all the time. I go into universities and speak on the subject quite a lot. And to be honest, when we put on events for a week, that's always the most well-attended session because people are so hungry to know the answers to it. I was having a conversation just recently with a cousin who told me she could never become a Christian because the Bible is too sexist for her. And actually, I think this challenge is only ramping up because of certain books that are being published by atheists. Even just last year, a new book's come out called God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction. And one of the challenges within that book is that the God of the Old Testament in particular is misogynistic. So you hear it all the time. It's kind of out there in culture, and a lot of people are assuming that to be true without actually having picked up the Bible for themselves and read it, which is actually a shame, because if they did, even if they open the first page in Genesis 1, you find a completely different picture being painted. And I love the verse that says that we're made in the image of God, both male and female. And I think that kind of washes over us. We don't realize in our culture today how radical that is. We think, well, of course that's what it's going to say, but compared to any other ancient Near Eastern culture, compared to Greek thinkers, that statement that men and women are made in the image of God is just completely radical. So there's just a real irony that people who are going around saying they're too feminist for Christianity don't realize that actually the equality they're fighting for, it was first declared and established by God at the very beginning of Scripture.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the irony of kind of a secular age that we're living in, is a lot of the secular intuitions about human rights actually historically have come out of Christianity. They didn't just pop out of nowhere. Different studies, even in places like China, are saying, hey, this is something tied to Christianity. They're willing to say that, whereas it's kind of like we've cut that off from our history, at least a lot of seculars have. So is there give us an example maybe of a verse that is thrown out there a lot in the Old Testament, and then how you might respond to that?
So I think there's a lot of confusion when people read the Old Testament, because often we'll pick it up and you just find a passage, you'll dive right in, but you're walking into it without any understanding of what's going on in the culture, in the context. So you assume that what you're reading is as offensive as it at first appears to you. So Christopher Hitchens actually said that when you read the Old Testament, you can find examples of being able to buy a bride like you would buy a horse. So for example, he's talking about bride price and dowries and things like that. And there's kind of assumption there that women are being treated like property, which is so fascinating, because when you actually get into the culture, what you realize is the complete opposite is going on. That actually these dowry, these bridal gifts are intended to be honoring of the women. It's a way of saying actually that I'm making a serious commitment to you, that I want to share my life with you. It's actually designed to protect the women in the circumstances that she might be widowed, or that if her husband leaves her, not that that's designed by God, but if that were to happen, then actually there's some protection for her, that she has some financial resources to fall back on. So actually, rather than it being about buying a woman as property, it's intended to honor. But we read the text and we immediately assume that something else is going on. Another example might be polygamy. So a lot of people pick up the Old Testament, they'll read stories of a man being married to more than one woman, or having various mistresses, and we immediately think, oh well, that must mean that God is pro-polygamy. What is going on? This seems so unfair. But I think one thing I always try and say to people is, don't assume because it's in the Old Testament that it's being endorsed by God. In fact, usually it's the opposite. Usually when we're reading the Old Testament, the examples of human behavior we're seeing are not there to be emulated, but they're precisely there because God is showing how far we've fallen, that culture is not the way he intended it to be, and actually he's trying to say something different. So whenever you read a story about polygamy, the inevitable reading from the story is always, look at what a disaster it is when marriage is used in this way. Let's go back to the beginning and what was God's original design for marriage? Oh, between one man and one woman. So I think it's taking a step back whenever we come across these texts, rather than panicking and thinking, oh my goodness, God must hate women, or God must hate slaves, or God must hate this person or that foreigner, or but actually looking and saying, what is the intention in this text? What is God's heart in it? What is it really saying? And when you take that step back, it's so encouraging, because you actually see, wow, compared to the other cultures at the time that it was written in, this is radically distinct. The vision for human flourishing is amazing.
Yeah, and so we need to be good as apologists or cultural engagers. We need to have a hermeneutic that actually works with the Bible. We need to understand what the Bible's doing. We need to understand history. It's a big task, but it's also a task we don't have to go it alone. We have the church, and we need to listen to scholars and leaders and what they're saying and think together about these things.